From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us. This is what we have coming up. Standing his ground, Boris Johnson vows to remain PM and press on with Brexit despite a huge Supreme Court loss. Breaking point. After years of threats, the opposition tries to impeach US President Donald Trump. Eco-anxiety. Parents and experts warn of the debilitating psychological effects of climate change. Climate backlash. We dive into the toxic online culture of harassment targeting young activists. And limbless chickens. The bizarre speech from Boris Johnson at the United Nations. It is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have Paul Tang, a Dutch MEP with the Socialists and Democrats group. Paul, which of these stories are you watching closely?
Always with amazement, the Brexit story, in this case, Boris Johnson.
All right, Boris Johnson. We're all watching Boris Johnson indeed. And we also have joining us Laura Huhtasaari, a Finnish MEP with the Identity and Democracy Group. What about you, Laura?
Well, the Trump impeachment is very important, especially now the presidential election is coming again.
Yeah, he seems to have some staying power there, Donald Trump. Okay, also joining us tonight, Dharmendra Kanani, Director of Insights at Friends of Europe. Dharmendra, what about you?
I think all of them are linked, actually. So I'm looking at all of them because I think there are real patterns of similarity between the top first two and the last two.
Indeed. It's interesting you say that it's all linked. But tonight we're going to begin in London. There's a lot of action there with British MPs rushing back to work a day after the UK Supreme Court ruled that Boris Johnson had unlawfully suspended Parliament. Well, the British Prime Minister cut his New York trip to the UN short to get back in time to Westminster as the Parliament resumed regular proceedings in the House of Commons today. And here is what MPs had to say about returning to work today.
Of course, we're back holding the Prime Minister to account. He's been in office for 2 months and only held himself up to scrutiny in Parliament for 5 days, which just isn't good enough. We've got a huge issue to sort out over Brexit, but also there's all the many other issues where he needs to be held to account.
I am chuffed to bits that the highest court of the land has unanimously decided that he acted unlawfully. Something we knew in our gut, knew in our hearts, and knew in our minds as well. But he did it anyway. So to be back here after that ruling, to have him dragged from the United States back here to face Parliament so that we can hold the executive to account. That's the way our parliamentary democracy should work. So in that sense, I am happy. But look, I'm not happy that we're such a divided country that we can't find a resolution to Brexit.
I don't mind Parliament being brought back into session. Though we've been told by the judges that the suspension didn't happen, the purgation didn't happen. I'll tell you what did happen. In 2016, people of this kingdom voted to leave, and we haven't left yet. And sooner or later, the rock and the hard place of the courts and Parliament trying to stop and frustrate the will of the people is going to meet and it's going to clash. And the sooner Parliament lets the people go, the better.
All right, let's go straight to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is in Westminster for us in the middle of all that action. So, Darren, back to school, action there. What has happened so far in the Parliament?
Yeah, quite a raucous return to Westminster and MPs today. Unsurprising in many regards, given the depth of feeling and anger amongst some of those MPs, which we've seen expressed on the floor of the House of Commons this afternoon. I think, Tessa, what's been interesting today is that the front bench of the Conservative Party, cabinet ministers, have come in for an absolute pasting from many MPs, not just opposition ones, but indeed some on their own side, following that judgment from the Supreme Court yesterday. Not least of all, the UK Attorney General. He is the man who advises the Prime Minister on legal matters. He is the man who told the Prime Minister that it was lawful to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks. He had to admit today that he was wrong, but he wasn't going to resign. He said if he had to resign every time, Tessa, he gave a wrong legal opinion, well, he wouldn't have been a barrister for very long. But in saying that, he did say that while he accepted the Supreme Court's decision and that Parliament did have to return, that ultimately it was a decision that was open to debate. This is the very boisterous UK Attorney General in the UK Parliament a little bit earlier.
This was a judgment of the Supreme Court of a kind which was clear and definitive. It often happens that governments lose cases. We didn't agree with it because, of course, we argued against it. But we accept the ruling of the Supreme Court, and we are proud that we have a country capable of giving independent judgments of this kind.
Now, it must be said that not all cabinet ministers agreed with that. In fact, one of them, the leader of the House of Commons, earlier on today, Tessa suggested this was a constitutional coup, what had happened yesterday. Where does this all leave Boris Johnson? Well, he's due to appear before MPs at some point. There is much talk that yet again he will try and push for a general election, something that he's been quite desperate for, something that proroguing Parliament was all about in many regards. He didn't get his way, and he hasn't got his way on proroguing Parliament in the end either. Also, it looks like he's not going to get his way either today on that, because the opposition MPs have suggested they're not willing to do that for fear that at some point, because of that election campaign, the current Prime Minister could still force through a no-deal Brexit.
Darren, from what you're saying, it seems like everything stays as they are, and these options, you know, there's not much room to maneuver. So is anything going to change between now and the 17th and 18th of October with the summit here? That's what we're looking at from here.
Well, if we've learned anything with Brexit, it is not really to make predictions. There are so many twists and turns to this story. It is nigh impossible to kind of work out where it's going. I think the consequence, essentially, of yesterday, that Supreme Court judgment, hasn't really moved the Brexit dial. Ultimately, Boris Johnson still needs to get a deal with Brussels. He's still hemmed in by this law essentially passed in the UK Parliament, which prevents the UK from leaving without a deal at the end of October. And that hasn't changed. And it's pretty clear he's not going to resign. I think ultimately what the difference of yesterday has made is it has damaged, I think, Boris Johnson's reputation, potentially amongst some voters. And second of all, this idea that somehow he could find a loophole next month to try and get round that legislation on preventing no deal, or indeed that he could prorogue Parliament again. I think yesterday's decision makes that a lot more difficult for Boris Johnson.
All right, thanks for that, Darren McCaffrey there in Westminster. Okay. I want to start with, you know, the words that it seems like constitutional coup. It's being thrown around. We've seen the backlash of the court ruling as well. These are the three judges that made decisions. Are you surprised by the kind of backlash, criticism of that decision of the court, Dharmendra?
I'm not, because of the role and the perception of judges in the UK in particular in this context. And, you know, you'll find that the man on the street that actually wants this to end will think that these are people who are out of touch and do not understand their reality. But more importantly, I think we mustn't underestimate the doublespeak coming out of Boris and his cabinet. If you watched Brian Cox, not the piece that you showed, but the one after, where he was like a bully boy, speaking to the back of his ranks and saying, what we need to do is invoke the will of the people. OK, we've done badly, but we don't necessarily agree, but we need to move on and actually call an election. So what they're doing is they're manoeuvring politically in a bullish way to say, let's sort this Brexit thing out. They want to take out of the equation...
Because it seems he was defending the court decision.
Absolutely. But what he wants to do is take out the equation unlawfulness and lying to the monarchy and focus on people and Brexit and leaving. And that's what they're going to do, I think. And that will have an impact on the street. And people will think, goodness sake, now the judiciary is getting involved in stopping us from leaving. No doubt, you know.
So that's interesting when you say that's the reaction that's coming from the people, from the street. I mean, bringing it even outside of the United Kingdom, are we seeing this kind of trend where there is really a distrust of institutions that are supposed to be the basis of democracy in each country? What do you think, Paul?
Depends a bit on the type of politicians, I would say, because this is clearly populist rhetoric. You blame the others.
But people
you can blame the media. Yeah, but okay, but
who are you playing?
The people also are being educated through the political debates. So it also depends if there's the counterbalance, the argument to make. No, this is part of our democracy. The independent judges is part of our rule and law and of our democracy. So in that debate, people are being educated on what democracy really is. And I must say, indeed, that Boris Johnson is very successful because what's being said, his reputation has been damaged. What I find a bit surprising is to see is that his popularity among the population is still high. So that's why he's betting still on the general election, knowing if he gets there, he has a good chance to be, well, at least the biggest party and come back as Prime Minister.
What do you think, Lara? Do you agree with what has been said?
Well, I think that the leave from European Union was the biggest democratic decision in the British history for a long time. I mean, the parliament has a problem. They want to cancel Brexit. That's what it's all about. And the lower court gave its approval to decision extend parliamentary recess. And naturally, I think what we are heading is really that politics is taking over the institution. But the decision, it is what it is, and we have to accept it.
But is it okay, as Dharmendra was saying in the messaging, is it okay to pit parliament and institutions against the people? Is that okay?
Well, I think that in democracy, everything should be under criticism. You are able to criticize everything, otherwise the development stops.
Can I respectfully disagree? If you begin, if politicians begin an argument with a lie, you have to continue lying. And what you have to do is continue defending that lie. It started with a referendum. You might say it's the biggest, outturn, but people were told lies about
17 million people wanted to leave.
Were told lies about what would it mean to leave. And then you had that repeated and repeated. And now you have politicians actually telling lies, like we have now. So, senior judges are saying the man lied. He has acted unlawfully. And I think there's similarities with Trump. The Mueller inquiry, biggest institution, again, nothing. So what people are thinking, actually, who do you trust at the end of the day? And with the onset of fake news, where, Boris will say one thing one day, deny it the next, say another thing, which is the same style of governance we're seeing elsewhere, people are left in a place of actually, who do you trust?
So, Laura, do you want to respond to what Dharmendra was saying?
Yes, I'm always thinking that when I talk about the fake news, and that usually means that you don't agree with somebody, we are saying that they're fake news or lies, and when the election was going on, I remember Finland was joining EU, and they lied to us. EU was not what it's supposed to be. They lied to us. I wasn't able to vote then, but if I would have voted today, I would vote no to EU.
No, fine, you can differ on that, but this is the populist rhetoric, and that you see it employed by Boris Johnson.
What is populist rhetoric?
It's the will of the population, and anything that's we represent the will.
What is bad? Listen to the people.
Anything in the way of the will of the population is not democracy. So that could be the judges, it could be the media, it could be politicians like me, which you don't agree with. This is what it's anyone to blame but ourselves. And this is kind of astonishing. And this is kind of astonishing. Boris Johnson made a decision, and he has been called back unanimously by the court. That's a big mistake. In any other country, the prime minister would resign.
Okay.
How come? Do you think he should resign or not? If you make a big mistake like this, should he resign or not?
Give me the last word, because we'll have to move on from this. Laura,
Will he resign? Should he resign?
On this.
I don't have an opinion of that. That's all Boris Johnson's. I mean, I can't. If you were in Boris Johnson's shoes, walk for a couple miles, after that you can know how he thinks. I can't make decisions behalf of somebody else.
I hope to be a bit more straightforward answer than this, but okay.
I think, how do you deal with unlawful actions of a prime minister? That's the biggest
there you go.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So there is another leader that is experiencing, criticism, and that is across the Atlantic. The United States President Donald Trump, he's also under fire because he is facing formal impeachment inquiry over allegations that he pressured the Ukrainian President Zelensky to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. So what happened, there's this phone call, the contents of which have not been released yet on the 25th of July, where it was claimed by, there's a whistleblower involved as well who said that Donald Trump had pressured Zelensky. Now, we haven't heard much from the Ukrainian government at all on this topic yet. They're meant to meet at the UN General Assembly tonight. So this is going to be interesting how it unfolds. Donald Trump said he had done nothing wrong. So this is actually what he said when Nancy Pelosi of the Democratic Party, she launched formally that impeachment process. This is what Donald Trump said. There has been no president in the history of our country who has been treated so badly as I have. The Democrats are frozen with hatred and fear. They get nothing. This should never be allowed to happen to another president. Witch hunt. Okay, so this is quickly unfolding, and there is a relationship here to Ukraine, which, in Europe, we're also watching very closely. Complicated case. Donald Trump has stayed on. He's got staying power, as I was saying. You were watching this. You're watching this topic, as you said earlier, very closely. What do you think is behind this, and is Donald Trump in trouble this time?
Well, this is another dirty trick from Democrats because they have nothing else.
Well, we haven't heard the content yet.
Yes, exactly. And I'm willing to change my opinion if that's different than the Russian collusion for 2 years. There was this witch hunt for 2 years. I mean, that obviously shows that the Democrats has nothing. They can't argue its politics or the unemployment rate or the economics, so they make these up.
Because there's also money involved. There are $25 million in military aid that was held back, and there are denials, obviously, that the president say, well, it has nothing to do with it, and no, he did not try to get something in return. Paul?
Yeah, I'm curious because the accusation is serious, right? You cannot use your function as a president of the United States for political ends in this way. That's against law, so it could be unlawful. You can say we don't know. He should give the transcript of the conversation. Would be very, very welcome. But I would say if the president of the U.S. is suspected of breaking the law, that's a good reason for impeachment, of course. Now you can say this is all a trick of the Democrats, but there's been sincere discussion among the Democrats. Are we going to do this? Because no president has been successfully impeached. Even Nixon was before the end of the impeachment. And by the way, Bill Clinton was most popular after he was impeached by the Republicans. So it's very mixed. But the fact that you may have a serious case here should also take serious, I think. So yeah, I'm very happy to see this evolve.
If I may say, I think you're playing party politics. If you were to say that they're simply Democrats have nothing, there is a series of actions that we've witnessed, and in each occasion, like he did today, and in that statement, he diverts it away from the actual deed, and say I'm a witch hunt, and becomes the victim, or to say everyone's telling lies.
Right.
Now, the Mueller inquiry said very clearly he was not exonerated. Very specifically, in the terms of the inquiry, he wasn't exonerated. Passes that by. Look at the circumstances. A whistleblower ordinarily would have a certain period of time where it would straight go to the Senate and elsewhere. It was blocked. And it was then released thereafter. And we have a telephone conversation with Nancy Pelosi and him, and then he said...
And now I think the transcripts have been...
They were going to be. I'm not sure if they are.
Right.
But the reality is you cannot avoid the timing of the issue. The telephone call and the decision to withhold money actually go hand in hand. And what we need to see is actually what is underpinning that. And I think we need to wait for Biden's statement, which we obviously need to have.
Yeah, because there's the other side of that also, is because his son has been implicated in, the pressure on his son having done business, I think, in Ukraine, and there were calls for investigation into activity that wasn't.
And where I see similarities is both strong men, bully boys, Trump and Boris, what they're doing is undermining the institutions that are providing a check and a balance on democracy. And what they do is they belittle it and say, actually, everyone's talking a load of nonsense. I'm telling the truth. They're just after me. And they're both playing the same game in an ironic way.
Okay, very quickly.
I think that you are talking about the rhetoric of the populists, and you are talking bullies. You're saying that Trump is a bully and Boris is a bully, and you are accusing the populist parties. It seems like everything that the populist parties win, then there's the loss of Democrats or the democratic or something. Democracy is in crisis or something. And the Russian collusion already shows 2 years and nothing.
Right, and just very quickly before we go, do you think Zelensky of Ukraine, he's stuck between a rock and a hard place? Where does he move?
I think he's absolutely caught in a total geopolitical fix. He needs support. He knows he's got trouble around the corner. He's just got the mandate. And I think he's thinking, I want to go under the covers and make this go away. Because whatever he says...
The EU is watching, Donald Trump is watching.
He's in no man's land. And actually, it's what the superpowers are doing is to really, again, trample upon Ukraine in a really unfortunate way.
OK, well, while impeachment proceedings were gathering pace in Washington, D.C., the president was at the UN General Assembly in New York launching an attack on globalism. Well, his French counterpart, however, had a very different message. Let's take a look.
The free world must embrace its national foundations. It must not attempt to erase them or replace them. Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots.
Et je ne crois pas non plus que les crises que nous vivons se règlent davantage par le repli nationaliste. Je crois très profondément dans le patriotisme, en tant qu'il est tout à la fois l'amour de la patrie et l'aspiration à l'universel. Je crois très profondément dans la souveraineté, en tant qu'elle est à la fois l'autonomie pour soi-même et la nécessité de coopérer.
I mean, love him or loathe him, Donald Trump's vision, do you think it is gaining traction in the world now amongst other leaders as well?
Definitely, definitely.
You think so?
Yes, and when I was listening to him, I remember the history that every single time, back in history in Europe, there's always men and politicians that want to make Europe as one state, and then there's always men like Nigel Farage who want their country back, who want their sovereignty back, and now we are again turning that people want to make their own decisions and make their own laws again.
So where does the future lie? Globalists or patriots? Go ahead, please.
No, but just, is it gaining traction, you ask? And I couldn't help but wonder that it's mainly the Anglo-Saxon countries which have the real problem with populists with Donald Trump and Boris Johnson nowadays, whereas in continental Europe there are populist parties like the True Finns and like Matteo Salvini in Italy, but and we're much less in power. So I don't see that they're gaining traction. I think it's a problem of the Anglo-Saxon world where the division in the country, you saw Clive Lewis before, the British MP say, our country is so divided. And it's especially in those countries. I'm wondering how you look at that, where you see the high inequality leads to a high division.
Right, well, we've run out of time, but certainly these two visions keep coming up in a lot of debates and a lot of issues here in the EU and will keep coming up. All right, we've run out of time, but coming up on Raw Politics, too radical, the backlash against Greta Thunberg and young climate change activists, plus futuristic refrigerators and fantastic hangover cures. Boris Johnson's UN speech leaves many scratching their heads in tonight's Raw Moment.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Well, that was 16-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg delivering an emotional speech to world leaders at the UN Climate Summit earlier this week. And it comes as experts are sounding the alarm over a rise in climate-related anxiety or eco-anxiety in children. Well, according to the American Psychological Association, the term refers to a chronic fear of environmental doom. Well, for more on this, I spoke to psychologist Caroline Hickman about what she's seen and how parents should be reacting. Let's take a look.
Well, people are expressing this in all sorts of ways in terms of this kind of fantasy or environmental doom of what's coming down the road. But they're also really frustrated, children in particular, that adults and the governments and people in control and charge with the power don't seem to be doing anything about it. And that's really compounding their anxiety and frustration and upset. And we saw a fantastic example of that with Greta Thunberg last night, where she was speaking with passion and power, but she was also speaking with grief and pain and frustration and giving direct messages to adults saying, do something. And if you don't do something, you're really abandoning the children. We certainly are aware of children saying that they don't want to go to school. There's no point going to school. We've got older children saying they don't want to go to university. They're talking about depression. I know a lot of teenagers talking about not ever wanting to have children because they feel terrible grief and they don't want to bring them into a world in which there are no polar bears or where other animals or other children are dying. I mean, first and foremost, I say to the children that whatever it is they're feeling is absolutely right. So it's absolutely crucial to be saying to children, this is not a mental illness, and to their parents, obviously, this is not a mental illness, they're not mentally ill. This is a really mentally healthy, emotional response to the realities of what we're all facing. You saw that with Donald Trump's dismissal of Greta Thunberg's feelings last night. That was absolutely the opposite of what we should be doing, quite honestly, right? So we need to be taking them seriously.
All right, well, I also spoke to a group of parents seeking professional help over the well-being of their children. And I asked them how the expression of these fears make them feel.
I think it's one of the worst things you can probably hear as a parent. I suppose what you want to be able to say and give to your children is a feeling of safety and hope and positivity for the future.
I think with my 5-year-old, I'm supporting her in the same way that I'm supporting myself. And the fact is we still do have an opportunity to change things. It's not a done deal. So by taking action with her and doing as much as we can over the next few years, it's something that really gives us hope and gives us more sort of energy and determination and positivity about it all.
And it's factual. I don't think it's particularly alarmist. It is what it is. It is the situation, and it's really, really sad that our kids are having to grow up at a time when they are having to hear this. We didn't have that as children.
Every time we talk about the things that are at risk, we also talk about what we're doing, our determination to turn it around, and we know we have the right and the power and the responsibility to stand up and make a change happen.
Part of being a good mother has to be fighting for my children's future. So I spend a lot of time trying my hardest to be the best parent, but part of that has to be going out and shouting on and fighting on their behalf. I do not want to be one of those people who if it all gets bad, to say to my children I didn't do anything about it. I can't be that person.
Okay, joining us for this conversation is Alexander Vondra, a Czech MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformist Group. We have Anna Cavazzini, a German MEP with the Greens EFA Group. And still with us, Laura Huhtasaari, a Finnish MEP with the Identity and Democracy Group. Okay, I'll first pose the question of what the psychologist was saying there, Caroline. As she was saying that this is a perfectly legitimate kind of feeling to be having, considering the state of the climate. Do you agree with that? It's perfectly legitimate to feel anxiety and depression and feel like there's no future.
No, I don't. And, you know, I'm a politician. I'm a father of three. And I think that this is a very dangerous game, you know, to promote the fear, to promote the anxiety.
But you have to acknowledge the fear of the children.
But, you know, yes, that's a 16-year girl. She has some ideals. She has some frustrations.
It's not just about Greta, but like the children of those parents.
Those people who are around and they are pushing this, I think this kind of a hysteria. I think that fear is a bad advisor.
Okay.
And I think that it's totally wrong.
You know what's interesting was when I asked the parents, like, is the kind of rhetoric in the media or even Greta, is it alarmist? And they said no, because that's the state of the climate, and we don't want to hide it from our children. That's their point of view. But okay, what do you think, Anna?
No.
I mean, when I look at Fridays for Future and the movement that has emerged in the last half year, I've never seen a more empowering movement for children, for youth, because actually with their protests, they managed to put climate on the top agenda of politicians. And I think this shows that there's no hysteria or anything going on like this. It's a really empowering movement. And it shows that young people can act and can do something and can change politics when they want. And as you said, I completely agree. We have the state of the climate. It's a fact. It's a scientific fact. And of course, if people get worried about it, it's very understandable.
Sure, and there is a growing number of medical bodies around the world, not just the American body, that acknowledge that anecdotally, we don't have numbers yet, but anecdotally that this is a growing cause of concern for people. Is this something we really should be taking seriously at this point and talking about and finding a way to deal with?
Of course. We all want greener and cleaner planet. That's our duty. And I think about Finland, which is very clean.
But
the air is very fresh.
But the anxiety of children.
Well, politicians should never use children as a propaganda tool. And that's what they are doing at the moment. Adults should be doing their politics and calming the children.
Yeah,
that's my job.
It's not about
that's
the people,
my job.
not just about the people in front of the camera. It's about the people, like their children who are seeing, you know, even when the IPCC report came out on the state of the climate, that's what a psychologist was saying. It's when the report came out on the state of the climate that she saw an increase in young people having this sort of feeling. So it's not just about watching, other activists. It's a state of the climate.
I guess it's a state of the hysteria that is containing.
Okay, let's go with Anna, and then
I think it's not hysteria, and I didn't see any politician using children for their propaganda. I can only see children who learn in school about climate change and then who just look at the facts and get active. And I think it's a very good thing if people, young children, youth, get active and go on the streets. I think it's at the end really, as I said, an empowering thing.
Okay.
And I think it's not only hysteria. I mean, if we look at the facts, climate change is there.
All right, we'll continue this conversation, but first, as climate action among young people grows, so too does a backlash against them. As you know, we've seen a little bit here. Well, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, he accused activists of antagonizing the situation at the UN. Alex in the Cube has more on this. Alex.
Well, Tessa, when it comes to all this, there is a difference, and a difference we must make between people straight up abusing climate activists. We've seen a lot of that. And then nuanced discussion, more nuanced discussion about whether the methods of someone like Greta Thunberg are the right ones. Well, let's start off by that moment none of us can ignore. Remember that? Greta's face when she saw the US president walking through. This got everybody talking around the world. There she goes, giving him what some people called a death stare. Now, that led the US president to have a rather sarcastic tweet saying here that Greta looks like a fun 16-year-old, looking forward to the future, highly sarcastic. Well, Greta shot back, turning that into her Twitter bio, seeing the spat there between the two. A very happy young girl, she says, looking forward to a future bright and wonderful. That is a quote, of course, from Donald Trump. Now, that is on the one side, but in the United States, things did get a little nastier. Greta, of course, having sailed over there, taking her message that spread not only across Europe, but now globally about radical action that's needed. Well, it did not go down very well with a pundit on Fox News. I can tell you this man here who repeatedly apologized to having said on Fox News, a pundit there saying that she was mentally ill, a mentally ill Swedish child, he kept saying, who was being used by the left. Now, while Fox News apologised for the comments of this pundit, it is an emblematic, I suppose you could say, the kind of abuse that has been directed personally at Greta Thunberg, her own state of health, which of course she has been very open, saying this is not a hindrance to me, it helps me see things differently, but people trying to use her character as a way to undermine her arguments. However, there is nuance here, because then on Europe 1, that's a radio station in France, French President Emmanuel Macron made a comment about Greta and the group she's part of taking legal action against France, saying here that the kind of confrontational methods here would, quote, divide society. So not a personal swipe like we've seen in the United States from commentators, but again questioning whether her actions are the right ones. And indeed, you've seen other people, let me just bring up Robert Colville here, saying, no doubt the science needs acting on, but he is a conservative commentator in the UK saying we need to unite behind the science of economics as well, saying that Greta's model, the kind of climate manifesto she's signing up to, is too radical and would hurt some of the poorest in the world. So there is nuance here to the backlash. But then I want to bring you up another angle. This is Iqbal here. He's the leader of Fridays for Future in Pakistan. Now, out of Europe, out of the United States, Iqbal describing the kind of difficulties he faces dealing with conservatives in Pakistan.
I used to get answers that, these type of things are not, manageable by men. These are only controllable by the God. And if you are trying to say that the glaciers are melting and this heat wave and the sunshine is getting hotter, then you are doing a wrong thing. It's really hard.
So there's worldwide discussion, Tessa, young people around the world facing these kind of questions about whether their methods are the right ones. We must differentiate that from, of course, the abuse that's been directed against people like Greta.
All right, thanks for that, Alex, and our team in the Cube. Okay, Alexander, I mean, you would say, I think, that the rhetoric, as you were saying earlier, it's a bit much, that it should be pulled back. But don't you think that without this kind of rhetoric, they're trying to communicate the urgency, aren't they?
No, look, I think I disagree with Emmanuel Macron of most of the things, but here is right. And I think they are using the children as a propaganda tool. I was born in communist Czechoslovakia, and I remember how the communists were doing exactly the same, promising, the paradise on the earth, and then at the end, we will be all in the hell. And here, environment is a challenge. It's our duty, to leave the planet in a better shape, or at least in the same to our kids or to our grandchildren. But without hysteria,
But you also can't say that all the climate protesters are.
I'll give Anna a chance to reply to what you said, because we're running out of time. This kind of hysteria has nothing to do with science. It's a religion, It's a religion, And we
Okay,
are,
Anna, respond. Sorry.
we are forced, to pay our indulgences or budget to go.
The urgency and the so-called hysteria comes from the fact that for 30 years we know about climate change, or even a little bit longer, and we have done too little. And it's really time is running out. If you look at the IPCC report that clearly says if we want to have the 1.5 degree goal and want to reach it, we have 10 years or something to go. So we need to act now. And this is what the children are
If you can
demanding.
say it in
very
5
quickly,
seconds.
yes, but in 50s we were 3.5 billion people. Now we are 7 billion people, and in the 50s there were 3.5 billion. So the population explosion is the problem, and that's what we should be reducing.
I mean, this is certainly a very divisive topic, even on social media, as Alex was saying, and certainly here. Okay, coming up on Raw Politics, stranded in Syria, our correspondent Annelies Borges, she speaks to foreign ISIS fighters who want to return to Europe. Her report next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. More than 5,000 Europeans left to join terrorist organizations between 2011 and 2016. While Europe figures out how to deal with the repatriation of these foreign fighters, questions are also raised as to why European citizens left in the first place. Well, our correspondent, Annelies Borges, she went to Syria. She spoke to a Belgian ex-fighter to ask about his motivations for joining and what will happen to him now. And she's joining us now from our headquarters in Lyon. Annelies, so you managed to speak to an ex-fighter, get up close and personal, and really know what he's thinking. What was that like?
Well, Tessa, we didn't get to choose who we would speak to. We asked Kurdish authorities, who currently hold some 2,000 foreign fighters, to meet one of them, to meet a European national, to try and understand just what drove thousands of young men to leave their countries behind and join a war that wasn't theirs. Hamza Nameh, a 29-year-old national, a Belgian national, agreed to speak to us, agreed to sit down and tell us his reasons, in a way because he's in a quest for forgiveness, a quest for a second chance. He told me that what drove him to Syria was a combination of personal problems. His grandmother had died. He looked for solace in religion and ended up mingling with a group of radical friends.
Do you regret coming here?
Yeah, I regret. Absolutely, I regret. It was my first crime. I never make crimes in Belgium. I was a student. I joined a terrorist group. Yes, that is my crime. I killed someone? No. I tortured someone? No.
You didn't do anything. You didn't commit any crimes. I've spoken to many people over the last few days who say the same thing. I didn't do anything. I wasn't part of it. Who did it? Where are the perpetrators? Where are those guys who committed those atrocities?
Of course, you have people, they make crime, they are captured, they are in the hands of the coalition. And don't forget that the intelligence, they make his job. They know who is who.
Do you have a message to Belgian authorities?
Yes, I want a second chance, that Belgium give me a second chance, because I know that Belgium take part of women and children. There's a way. If there's a way for the women and children, why is not a way for men? If I was in the place in the authority, or even I was from the population, I say the same thing. Let these people die. Let these people send them to Baghdad, make this and this. That's the opinion public. I understand this feeling, that the people are angry. I can understand this. But don't forget, we have feeling. You understand?
And now the issue of reintegrating these fighters who wish to disengage from extremist violence, is something that is haunting governments all over the world. We talk about 20 to 40,000 foreigners who joined terrorist organizations, who joined ISIS from 110 different countries. And so there's no one-size-fits-all policy here. There's no one strategy governments can apply, because these people are so different. They have different reasons, they have different experiences, different traumas. Some governments opt for incarceration, for punishment, judicial punishment, but even that proves very difficult, because most of the evidence and the witnesses are back in Syria and Iraq. Other governments have been investing in rehabilitation programs, but they, of course, come with a cost. And The question I've heard again and again throughout the research for this project is, should we be spending our money on people that effectively turn their backs on us? There's no easy answer to that question, of course. Authorities have been trying to weigh the costs, the danger these people represent versus the cost that entails bringing them back into society.
Thank you for that, correspondent there, Annelise Borges. And here with us in the studio to talk about this, our Brussels correspondent Jack Parek, and Alexander Vondra, a Czech MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists group, is still with us, and Dharmendra Kanani from Friends of Europe is back. All right, you being the only MEP here, I will ask, you know, the answer to this question of what to do with foreign fighters is very difficult. Should it be coming from an EU level rather than a per-country basis? What should be done? Should we let them in?
I have adopted this for EU level. So, look, it's an example of the failure of the integration in some of the EU member states because, you know, we are not feeding up, like the Czech Republic is not feeding up those.
But would you take back the foreign fighters?
We did not have any. We did not have any. It was a story of Belgium, it was a story of France, it was a story of the UK.
That?
It's a Europe, but it's a failure of the integration in the countries like from Sweden to Belgium. It's not the failure of the integration in the Czech Republic. So, look, I'm far from pushing Belgium, you know, to give them the second chance, you know.
Right. Okay, I mean, what's interesting in what Annelise showed is he said he wants a second chance, but he doesn't regret actually going there before. So how do we deal with this, Dharmendra?
I think, you know, it's the wrong question. What's the best humanitarian reaction to this problem? These are foreign fighters who are nationals from all these countries. The countries need to ask themselves, how did we fail them? These are people mostly furthest away from the labour market, don't feel they fit in, and they are groomed by fundamentalists into feeling secure, warm, with a network and purpose to their lives. How can government change that in the future and prevent it? To say we shrug our shoulders and say, get on with it, will actually be a failure, because what they'll do is you'll breed new foreign fighters.
Yeah, but it doesn't still answer the question of whether they come back.
They can come back. Right. They can come back in a controlled manner. But actually, that investment might be wiser than actually looking 10 years down the line having more. And I'm more concerned about the 45,000 kids in camps in northern Syria that actually is going to become another breeding ground. And that will only just come and slap us in the face.
Well, you can catch the full report of Annelise Borges on Friday at 9 p.m. on this channel, on Euronews. Well, we'll also be talking more about this subject on your call tonight, so do stick around after the program. And also coming up, we want to know what you think about Greta Thunberg and the young climate activists, which we were talking about a bit earlier. Have they become too radical? And we want to hear from you. Our phone number is 00800 333 7002. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics on social media, and you can also look for us on Skype. Our lines will be open soon.
Do you think that British judges go too far?
Yes, I do. No, I don't think at all. No, they didn't go too far. Boris Johnson was given advice by the Attorney General that what he was doing was OK.
We are asking, should Boris Johnson resign?
Definitely not. Yes, he should. His behaviour is despicable and it's not befitting of a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
The point being is this is
but
a
not,
process.
that doesn't actually threaten democracy.
You promised you wouldn't interrupt me.
I know, but I lied.
well.
That was a great moment. So those were the highlights of last night's Your Call, and we're doing it all over again tonight. So that's at 7 p.m. after the Raw Politics program. So do stick around 6 p.m. if you're in the UK and Ireland. And our correspondent, Jack Parek, he's hosting with me tonight. And joining us to talk about this, we still have Dharmendra Kanani and Alexander Vondra. Okay, so we're talking about 3 topics as usual tonight. And here are tonight's hot topics.
I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry.
The moment Donald Trump's opponents have been waiting for. The impeachment proceedings triggered amid allegations the U.S. president pressured his Ukrainian counterpart to investigate his election rival, Joe Biden. For Mr. Trump,
look, it's just a continuation of the witch hunt. It's the worst witch hunt in political history.
So we're asking, should Donald Trump be impeached? It started with a lonely protest on the streets of Sweden, but quickly sparked a worldwide movement. And now, teen climate activist Greta Thunberg is turning her fire on politicians.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words.
Thunberg filed a complaint at the UN against 5 countries, including France. But Emmanuel Macron has fought back, defending his country's action and warning that, quote, very radical positions risk polarizing society. So we're asking, has Greta Thunberg become too radical? What to do with citizens who left to join the so-called Islamic State? A question that has plagued Western governments. The UK has stripped citizens of citizenship, while the US has warned that refusing to repatriate IS fighters threatens security in the Middle East. As part of an exclusive Euronews report, we're asking, how should Europe deal with foreign fighters? Get involved and have your say. Should Donald Trump be impeached? Has Greta Thunberg become too radical? How should Europe deal with foreign fighters? This is your call. And this is how you can get in touch. You can call us at 00800 3333 7002. Write to us, rawpoll@euronews.com. Or on social media, use the hashtag #RawPolitics, and you can also search for us on Skype. All right, before we went on air, we were already discussing this, and we were talking about the question of, has Greta Thunberg become too radical? Obviously, referencing what Emmanuel Macron has said about antagonizing societies. I think this is going to be quite a topic that would get some reaction. We see it online. We see the reactions to Greta.
Certainly, Tessa. To be honest, there is a huge sense that Greta has become the sort of microcosm, the centre of this green movement. And there are some people that feel very awkward about a 16-year-old having such a responsibility, and there are some people that feel her to be an inspiring figure. We want to hear from everyone. What do they think? Has she become too radical, or is she the figurehead of a movement?
I mean, Dharmendra certainly has an opinion. You don't actually think...
I think it's the wrong question. I think that we should be asking ourselves, actually, why should a teenager have to hold us all to account and shake us out of our complacency? And it's classic. I think it's sad that the question is about whether she's become too radical. And actually, the question is that why are governments not taking the actions they need to take in the face of science? And I'd be interested in what citizens think, because actually, I think the failure of scientists actually has been to really come out in very simple terms about the damage. We're in Brussels. We had 32 degrees last Saturday. Unheard of this time of the year.
But, but isn't this perhaps why Greta Thunberg has become so successful? Because she got the message across. She was a young girl
because if it were an adult,
that walked out of the school.
Indeed, but
simple.
Absolutely. But now, I mean, she's really fostered a global movement without asking for it. There's a kind of a sense of a real symbolism and an identity with other young people who are saying, you know, we've had enough. Politicians aren't doing it.
Your question was whether it should have been a 16-year-old.
Why did it take a 16-year-old to shake us out of our complacency?
Strong messaging.
Indeed,
perhaps,
but
I mean,
politics.
In our discussion earlier about this, I mean, you had strong opinions about it. But if it had been an adult, would you still be against? Would you still say, oh, they're being used? If it had been an adult?
No, look, I would be in favor of of a rational debate, of the scientific debate, but not. I think we are reaching a state of the religion. It's not a science, it's a religion, where, you know, somebody is painting the portrait
as
of the
hearse
like a hell.
You were saying,
and
but, well...
we should have
we need
to pay
your opinion.
for the sins of our grandparents, and I disagree.
All right, we've run out of time, but
you
you can let us know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Do you think we should be asking a different question, as Dharmendra was saying? All right, time for our raw moment tonight. Boris Johnson unleashed his unique vernacular during a UN speech on the future of technology and Brexit. And there were some interesting reactions from the floor. Let's take a look.
Voice connectivity will be in every room and almost every object. Your mattress will monitor your nightmares. Your fridge will beep for more cheese. AI. What will it mean? Helpful robots washing and caring for an aging population, or pink-eyed terminators sent back from the future to cull the human race? What will synthetic biology stand for? Restoring our livers and our eyes with miracle regeneration of the tissues, like some fantastic hangover cure? Or will it bring terrifying limbless chickens? When Prometheus brought fire to mankind in a tube of fennel, as you may remember, with his brother Epimetheus, Zeus punished him by chaining him to a Tartarian crag while his liver was pecked out. And this went on forever. A bit like the experience of Brexit. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
What say you, Dharmendra?
I mean, you know, if it wasn't real, you just have, you know, you have to cry. I mean, here's someone, I mean, it's complete buffoonery. And actually, it's another case of how he's able to use his language and his kind of upper-class foppishness to really get round
certainly entertained, certainly entertained the audience
absolutely.
there. OK, well, thank you so much for watching us. Don't forget, stick around for your call. It's coming up next. Have a good evening.